Okay, hello everyone. It's Clarke Towson here. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Bitcoin today. So, I think from my conversations that I've had with friends and family that there is a misunderstanding about what Bitcoin is, how it works, what the benefits are of it, and so on. And there's a whole lot of stuff that's in the media, which mainstream media it's at the point where they really need some experts to come on and talk about Bitcoin rather than the people that they get on the news in these news articles and on television, right? Especially here in Australia. Michael Saylor, the CEO of MicroStrategy, made an enormous investment in Bitcoin, over $425 million USD. Now, why would the CEO of a big corporation spend that amount of money to buy up Bitcoin? Well, so what are people missing about this? He was on CNBC and the host was asking him questions, and she was talking about Bitcoin as being speculative, right? What Michael Saylor saw is what I saw 4 years. Real estate, stocks, precious metals, whatever the assets are, they're all increased in supply when there is a corresponding increase in demand. What do we see in the real estate market? We see new properties come online, we see developers come in, buy up land, create more apartments. As prices rise, they've got more incentive to sell more product. In the precious metal markets, we see the same thing as gold and silver prices rise. When it comes to stocks, corporations, same thing again. If there is a product or service that's in the marketplace that's got a very high demand, more companies come in to fulfill the supply. As the price goes up, think about it this way. You've got a whole lot of computers on a network that are verifying all the transactions that are occurring. The way Bitcoin works is that every 10 minutes, all the transactions that occur on the Bitcoin network are collated and added to a block and added to the blockchain. What is the blockchain? It's a series of blocks. What is that? Think about it as a ledger. And instead of having one central authority like a bank, having one copy of the ledger, you've got all these people on the Bitcoin network that have got a copy of the ledger. So all the transactions can be seen. They're all out in the open. That's why Bitcoin is not a good instrument to use for organized crime, because every transaction creates a trail. It's on the blockchain, and the police can easily track down to see who has made those transactions. Now, whilst it's pseudo-anonymous, that doesn't mean it's completely anonymous. And there are a whole lot of forensic tools that can be used to look at the blockchain that law enforcement can use to track down criminals. Now, I'm very interested in Bitcoin as an investment, always have been. I've spent a lot of time and effort looking into investments in the past, and I still do now. When I came across Bitcoin, I realized with the mining schedule that I was looking at a very scarce asset, and over time it would become even more scarce. Now, there's something called the stock to flow ratio. And what is that? Now, think about gold. Gold is a scarce asset, and there is a certain amount or stock of gold that's held in vaults. So the block supply reward is currently 6.25 bitcoins. Now, in less than 4 years' time now, because the last block reward halving was in May of this year, it will halve again. So there will be only 3.25 bitcoins that are rewarded to the miners. Now, what is this reward? How does this all work? So what the miners are doing, they're competing. They're competing in order to add all those transactions into a block and add it to the blockchain. So the winner of that competition gets rewarded those 6.25 bitcoins. Now, they can print up as much or as little of it as they like. And what happens when they do this is that it devalues everybody's savings, especially when they're printing more money, like what's happened during the coronavirus pandemic. Central banks from all over the world have been printing up vast sums of money. So what we're going to see over the incoming years will be inflation. That money has got to end up somewhere. So under the traditional fiat currency system, we're ending up with a whole lot of inflation, a lot of money in the system, which is going to cause prices of assets to rise. Now, the governments have got the CPI, or that CPI calculation for the cost of living. What's interesting about that is that CPI always seems to be very understated. And when you actually look at the CPI calculations and the index that they use, all the stuff that people really want is not included in it, right? Luxury real estate, luxury cars, a good education, all the really good stuff that people want is outside of the CPI, which is nuts. So the government statistics on how much the money supply is being increased and the cost of living, those statistics, the government has got an incentive to lie about them, or to, because the government's got to pay social security benefits, pensions, and the like. Bitcoin is the solution to all of this. Whilst the governments and the central banks are printing up a vast amount of this fiat currency, the amount of Bitcoin, they're all being gobbled up by just two entities, the Grayscale Investment Trust and PayPal, since they've come on the scene. You've got two corporations that are gobbling up the entire daily supply of Bitcoin. And with Grayscale in particular, when is that Bitcoin going to come onto the market? Anybody who knows anything about Bitcoin knows full well the goal is not to buy it and trade it and sell it sometime down the line, right? It's to hold on to it. Anyone who truly understands Bitcoin understands that it's the only asset in the world that cannot be increased in supply when there's a corresponding increase in demand. Or in other words, the way that Michael Saylor puts it, it's the only asset out there that's not bleeding. What's he mean by that, by bleeding? Well, think about a house. When you own a house, you've got to pay rates, land tax, maintenance, all right, fees to the government, okay, for the ownership of that house. So that asset that you own is bleeding. It's also bleeding money in terms of the mortgage interest that you're paying to the bank. Now, over time, a house is likely to increase in price. Now, the underlying value of the house, though, in many cases, is often the same, unless there's been some kind of development or a vast improvement in the area, such as what happened in Port Melbourne, where I was born and raised, where the suburb went from one of the poorest areas of Melbourne to one of the richest areas of Melbourne. And that all occurred over a long period of time. But, I grew up seeing that this asset is being reduced in supply every 4 years. Now, out of the 21 million Bitcoin that will ever be out there in terms of the supply, 4 million of those Bitcoins are lost because in the early days, people didn't look after their keys. A number of those Bitcoins are owned by the founder or the group of people who created Bitcoin, who is still not known who created it. And that's one of the smartest things that the founder, the creator, did, was to disappear. So who's going to trust money that has got a founder and it's got a CEO and all the rest of it? Bitcoin is the only cryptocurrency out there that is completely decentralized. Now, all these altcoins, they're going to fail, and the vast majority of them are going to fail. And think about the situation. Bitcoin, completely decentralized, no founder that's known about, nobody who's in central control of the currency, versus the altcoins, which there's somebody who's in charge, there's a CEO, there's people involved, there's marketing teams, on it goes, right? Bitcoin is the one hope. The rest of them, no. Now, even though I own a basket of the altcoins, I don't expect them to do well. Not like how well Bitcoin will do, right? So when it comes to the mining of Bitcoin, it is completely decentralized, and that's really important. So the miners, in terms of the security of the network, the more miners there are and the higher the price goes, the more miners that will come in and the higher the security of the network, because the hash rate goes up. Now, the hash rate refers to how... Now, with fiat currencies, there's no cost to create them, right? The central banks of the world can just create this fiat currency literally by typing in a couple of numbers on a keyboard. And everybody else, we all have to work for this money, right? We have to work for it. Well, in the coming years, there's going to be a big difference between people who own Bitcoin and who don't own Bitcoin. And anyone who's smart enough to go off, read the Bitcoin white paper, look at the mining schedule, see what is going to occur, asset out there. So when it comes to monetary goods, Bitcoin is the hardest money out there. Now, that's important. There's a book called The Bitcoin Standard, which is a very interesting read. It talks a lot about the history of money and how ancient civilizations, the ones who used the hardest money, came out ahead of the ones who didn't. So back in the day, there are certain things used as money. So seashells at one stage were used as money. Now, seashells had value in locations where they weren't abundant, so away from the seashore. Now, has not yet gone up to a ridiculous amount, okay? If people fully understood what Bitcoin is, how it works, the mining schedule, the rarity of it, just how rare it is in comparison to other assets, the fact that it's got a fixed supply, that's fixed, okay? Whereas every other asset's got a variable supply. If more people understood these concepts of the world in the future, when Bitcoin succeeds. Now, I believe that Bitcoin is going to become the #1 most valuable currency in the world. It'll reach #1 perhaps within the next 5 years. And that means a Bitcoin price of over $100,000 US. People think, well, how can that possibly happen? How can something that is not real be worth so much money? That's the thought process of so many people who are out there. Well, look at the mathematics, look at the white paper, look at the mining. Looked at these sorts of matters, and they leave it up to stockbrokers and financial advisors and the like to make their decisions for them. Well, that's all very well and good, but even today, financial advisors are not going to tell you to go and invest in Bitcoin. It's too early, right? Now, being early is really important in technology, okay? When you're early, it can give you a great advantage over other people. Now, I've always been early in technology. Got on the internet back in 1994, got into Bitcoin in early 2017. Now, that's not early enough for some people, right? But it's still early, even today, okay? So I was investing in Bitcoin when it had a market cap of, I think it was about 30 billion. So it's now upwards of what, 400 billion, something like that. The market cap's increased by about 10 times since I've been investing in it. Still early. Apple, what is Apple? Apple's like a $2 trillion corporation, right? And we're talking about a monetary system here, okay? A monetary system. So Bitcoin is set to absorb a huge amount of the world's capital over time, because people are going to come to the same conclusions that myself and Michael Saylor and various other people out there have come to. They will look at their assets and they'll say, hang on a second, why do I own this commercial property that hasn't even been increasing very much over and above inflation, when I could put the money into Bitcoin instead? It's not going to be bleeding energy, and it will make me a lot more money over time. Friends of mine have said, Clarke, why don't you buy a house? Why don't you sell your Bitcoin and buy a commercial property? Let's use that as an example. let's say I take $100,000 worth of my Bitcoin and I put it down as a deposit on a commercial property, and I buy that commercial property, and in 5 years' time, okay, I'm going to look back and I think that I'm going to see that that $100,000 in Bitcoin would have increased to about $1.4 million in Bitcoin, and the commercial property will be at a very similar price in 5 years' time, right? Maybe 20% higher. All right. So why would I sell the Bitcoin to invest elsewhere? Why would I sell the Bitcoin to buy any other kind of stocks or precious metals or start a business or any of that stuff, when the greater opportunity is in holding the Bitcoin itself, in holding on to it over time as it appreciates greatly in value? Now, think about it this way. We've seen the rise and the success of Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, all these social networks. And that's what they are. They are networks. Metcalfes Law talks about how to value a network and how a network increases in value by how many people come onto the network and use it. And we all know this. If I've got a telephone and nobody else has got one, the value of that phone is zero. You know, as soon as more people buy telephones and get connected up as a network, the value of that telephone network increases. We've seen with Facebook, with billions of users, MySpace before it, and many other companies out there who have become big brand name success stories on the internet. Now, I hear what some people might be saying now. There you go, Clarke. Bitcoin is the equivalent of MySpace or Netscape. Those companies about protocols. What is a protocol? TCP/IP, Transmission Control Protocol / Internet Protocol. That's the underlying networking technology that makes up the internet. It wasn't the first protocol in the networking space. It wasn't even the best. But the history of protocols teaches us one important thing, and that is the first mover advantage is very important. It's essential. So over time, TCP/IP won. Now the protocol's lost. It's going to be the same thing with Bitcoin. Bitcoin's lead is great. It is too far ahead of all the rest of the cryptocurrencies. It doesn't matter that there are other cryptos out there with quote-unquote better technology or improvements, or they do this or that better than Bitcoin. It doesn't matter. Bitcoin is going to win the race. It's going to win the race. It has won already. Now, back in 2017, that wasn't as clear as what it is now. I was investing in early 2017, but I didn't know that it was going to win until late 2017, mid 2018. Okay, so there were problems that were occurring in Bitcoin back then when it split off. There was a fork. There was a lot of problems involved by bad actors like Roger Ver and others in the space. But we're at a stage now where it's too big to fail. It's got too much of a lead over all the rest of the cryptocurrencies. It's won the race. Companies and individuals will utilize Bitcoin as a store of value. It's a better store of value than anything else out there. Yes, it's volatile. Yes, its price can rise quickly, and it can fall quickly as well. We see this in the history of everything that has got store of value properties. Early gold was like this as well. This is called price discovery. Price discovery within a market to determine, okay, what is the asset worth? Now, with Bitcoin, that's happened very, very quickly. Very quickly. Now, what's it going to be in another 4 to 5 years? How many users? Look at the history of the internet. Look how quickly the number of users come onto the network and started using it. All right. So there are billions of people on the internet today, worldwide. It's had a massive impact on people's lives. at the moment, Bitcoin is difficult to understand, hard to use. People don't fully trust it. That's another big factor. But over time, it'll become ubiquitous. People will use it and they won't need to understand it. When you get into a car, you go for a drive. Do you understand how an engine works? You understand all the mechanics of the car? I don't. I'm still able to drive places. All right? Do you understand how a computer works? Most people don't. I do. It doesn't cause most people to not be able to use the computer just because they don't understand it. There was a time back in the day when I first started using Linux, when I first got an email account, when I first got set up with an internet service provider. It was very difficult to get on the internet. I needed a modem. I had to download Mosaic as a web browser. I had to compile my own email program. 20 years later, that same experience of me downloading an email program, compiling it in the C language on a Linux box, and sending my first email, 20 years later, that process was replicated by my mother with a simple swipe on her cell phone, right? Right? So we're very early when it comes to this technology. Very early. ARK Invest wrote a research paper, and their analysts believe that the price of Bitcoin, the value of it, will increase 14 times within the next 4 to 5 years. That's by 2025. It'll hit a $3 trillion market capitalization. I looked at the report. It's very interesting. It's available on the internet. You can look it up. There's a lot of other resources out there on the internet as well, talking about Bitcoin, how to use it, how to get into it, what its value could possibly be in the future. There's a lot you can do to educate yourself about all this sort of stuff, okay? And there's no excuses either. In 5 years' time, you look back and you say, I had my opportunity and I didn't buy it, right? Now, I could have been one of those people, but as soon as I read the white paper, I knew. But I had a lot of education before. I'd been reading a lot about economics. I'd studied finance as well, informally. I've been looking at all of this sort of stuff. So for me, it was straight away, I got it, okay? And most people aren't going to get it that quickly. But most people understand inflation. They don't fully understand it intellectually, but they know full well that, hey, hang on a second. I started off earning $35,000 a year, and now I'm on $100,000 a year, less than 20 years later. Why is it that my salary has gone up so much, yet the price of assets have gone up so much more, right? Why is the cost of living always rising continuously? And so on. Most people understand this. What they need to understand is that Bitcoin is the exit. Bitcoin is the way to take your fiat currency, which is constantly decreasing in value, and invest it in an asset that's got a fixed supply. Fixed. It's the only asset in the world with a fixed supply. All right? I hope this talk has been enlightening. All the best, everyone.